Hi there everyone and welcome back to Higher Biology. Today we're going to continue with Unit 3 and we're moving on to Key Area 6, Social Behaviour. So in this key area we're mostly going to be looking at why some animals decide to live and work in groups rather than just being solitary, and also what behaviours can be seen in these social groups. So first of all, in terms of why do some animals live in social groups, we need to think about what the benefit of being in a social group is. So one of the first major advantages that we'll discuss in the later part is protection. It's the whole idea of safety in numbers. There's better to be lots of you rather than just one of you out on your own. Also, in terms of animals, it's much easier to find mates. If you're all living in one group, there'll be members of the opposite sex there in your own group. You don't need to go away hunting and looking for them. It can be easier to catch food if you all work together, and that's again something else we're going to go into a little bit more detail with, but also help with raising young. So again, if you were on your own and you're raising offspring, it can be difficult to raise offspring and also find food and also fight off any predators. Whereas if you're in a group, these ideas or these tasks can be kind of shared, which can be really beneficial as well. So there are many good reasons to actually live in a group, in a social group, but we're going to have a look at some of the behaviours that have came about as a result of animals living in groups. And the three we're going to focus on are the first one called social hierarchy, which is basically the ranking of members in a group, because in these social groups, not all the animals are going to be equal. There are going to be some animals at the top, but there's also going to be some at the bottom. So we'll look at how this happens. As mentioned, we're going to go into a little bit more detail about working together to get food, which would be cooperative hunting, so predators hunting together, and also looking at how you can gain more protection by being in a group and the idea of social defence. So, just to go into a little bit more detail, we're going to look at social hierarchy. So, in large social groups, you're going to find animals are ranked, and they're ranked as a result of aggressive behaviour. So, this whole idea of asserting your dominance, where you'll find that higher ranked animals are dominant over lower ranked individuals, which we would call subordinates. Okay, and a good example here, just like in the cartoon here, is pecking order in birds. So chickens, for example, if you have seen or had chickens or anything like that, you'll know that they can be quite vicious when they're first put together in a group, because they show this aggressive, threatening behaviour by pecking each other. And effectively, the chicken that is pecked the most by the others is going to be the lowest ranked chicken, whereas the one that is pecked the least is going to be the dominant chicken, and the rest of them in between are ranked based on that pecking order. So as you can see here, there's some different forms of threatening behaviour going on. So in this social hierarchy, your dominant individuals will carry out these ritualistic threat displays. So the important thing for you to get into your head is that these aggressive moves by dominant individuals are ritualistic and they're threatening. Now, in terms of a response to this, if you have a subordinate which is not wanting to challenge the dominant member, it's not really wanting a fight, it's not wanting to be eaten, then what they will do is they will carry out submissive behaviour, or we can call it as well appeasement behaviour. Basically, any sort of behaviour to try and reduce conflict. It might not stop conflict, but it's an attempt to reduce this chance of a fight happening. If a dominant member is carrying out this ritualistic threat behaviour, then the subordinate is going to start being submissive. So you can see in the image here on the left, you have some dominant threatening behaviour being shown by the wolf, teeth bared, quite upright, whereas this subordinate wolf is being very submissive by lying down, keeping its head below the dominant wolf's, and licking it as well, showing that it's not a threat, it's not trying to challenge. So the idea of these social hierarchies, though, and if you are the dominant animal, there must as well be an advantage of being that dominant animal. The chances are that if you're dominant, your genes, first of all, are probably going to be favourable because you're often the sort of the biggest, the fastest, the toughest. But if you're dominant, you have far more chances of your favourable genes being passed on to offspring. Now, what can also happen, though, is that in these social hierarchies, some animals will form alliances within these hierarchies in order to increase their social status. So we'll look at this a little bit more at the end of this key area of primates, but effectively, if you don't really want to be challenging the dominant or the alpha monkey, but you still want to have the benefits of being ahead of the rest of the pack, you may form an alliance in terms of, I'll be your friend if I can work my way up the ranking system here, but I'm not trying to challenge you. So the other two that we talked about are fairly self-explanatory, but we'll go through these. One of the other big advantages to living in groups is cooperative hunting. So in cooperative hunting, essentially these predators will hunt together to increase hunting success. You've got more chances of winning or gaining food if you all work together. Now, this can be through several different ways. Sometimes it can be animals setting an ambush where one predator leads prey into a trap. Other times as well, some animals work in this running down theory where they basically just take turns chasing after something until that prey is tired and they can all move in for the kill. Regardless of how they go about it though, by taking part in cooperative hunting, there's a range of advantages for everyone in this group. So both dominant and subordinate animals will gain more food than if they just foraged on their own. So you're all going to get a meal, whereas if you all just went off and did your own thing, there would be some animals who would successfully hunt and catch prey, whereas all ones might go hungry. The other thing as well is that less energy is going to be used per individual because you're all working together, and you can also work together to bring down larger prey. So again, if you bring down larger prey, there's going to be more food for all of you, and there's also less energy being used per individual than if you all went off and did your own thing. So a range of advantages of hunting in groups. And really the opposite of this is also true as well in social defence. By staying together as a large group, so again this idea of safety in numbers, you can have a much wider chance of protection from predators, and that's going to increase your chances of survival. So you can see some images like meerkats all standing on end, keeping an eye out. What they can often do is take turns looking out for predators, while others will eat or forage for food, and then they can swap over. Now, this works really well because if they were individual, they couldn't do both at the same time, and whenever you have your head down eating something, that could be when a predator is stalking you and is going to eat you, effectively. Whereas if you're taking turns, it means that some of you will take time to look out, and you'll still get your chance to have some food as well. The other one that you've probably seen on a few Attenborough documentaries and such is this idea of a group formation, where if you have young or sometimes very old or vulnerable members of your group, you can sort of form a circle if a predator is approaching, and that makes it a lot harder for the predator to actually try and catch something. It increases all of your chances of survival in general. So again, really important advantages to being in a group. You will come across social hierarchies for this behaviour, but you may also be engaging in cooperative hunting, and social defence is also going to increase your chances of survival. Now, the next part of this key area, we're going to be talking about something called altruism. Now, altruism is basically an idea of unselfish behaviour. Now, in the previous key area, we looked at things such as parasitism, where a parasite gains at the benefit of the host. We looked at mutualism, where both organisms benefit from the relationship. Altruism is different from both of these. What it is unselfish behaviour, which is detrimental or potentially harmful to the donor, but it's beneficial to the recipient. So there's a lot of different animals in terms of these social structures who will exhibit altruism. This idea that they will put the group ahead of themselves individually. Now, there's two different main forms of this that we're going to look at, and you need to know the difference between them, although they are both altruism. The first is reciprocal altruism. The idea of this is that you can go and do effectively a kind deed, an unselfish behaviour to another animal in your group, but you're doing it with the prospect of that favour being returned to you. So you could argue it's not overly unselfish at all, but for example, something like grooming parasites out of apes. That is unselfish behaviour. You're using energy to try and get parasites, which could be harmful, out of a fellow primate. They are gaining from this experience. You are putting out some energy. However, in reciprocal altruism, you're expecting them to then return the favour afterwards. So you will later gain from that as well. The other one, which is a common form that we can see in these social groups, is called kin selection. So kin meaning sort of your family. This is a much stranger form of altruism, which is used to help close relatives. So what will happen here is you will show altruism, you will show this unselfish behaviour towards close family members by putting yourself at harm. So often with animals, this can be either by sacrificing yourself. So some animals will go and cause a distraction if there's predators coming near, say their nests or such, where they will run off or use an alarm cry knowing that they will get eaten, but that will give enough time for the other members of the group, of the close relatives, to hide. So the idea behind this is, although it's detrimental to the donor in the long run benefits from the increased chances of survival of these shared genes from their offspring. The idea being that if you are eaten, for example, okay, or if you're killed through altruism, but the rest of your close relatives survive, the close relatives will all hopefully go on and reproduce, and your shared genes will get passed through into the next offspring. So although it's not directly your offspring, there will be many members of offspring that share your genes. So we can see some examples of altruism through social insects. So there's a lot of different insects that have some really complex social behaviours. And in these social behaviours, there can be a division of labour where there's certain jobs that certain types of the insect do, or certain sexes of the insects or ages. And often we have this, what we often call workers, this level of social insect which show extreme levels of altruism. So in terms of these social insects that we'll take a look at, we're going to really focus on bees, but there's also wasps, ants and termites as well. Any of these massive colonies you may have seen before, there is actually a very complex social system driven behind this. So in this idea, in this social construct that they have, there is this division of labour that I talked about. So there will be sterile members of the colony which cannot have any offspring, okay, so they're sterile, but what they will do is they will work in order to provide food or gather food. They will also carry out defence, and they may also carry out other jobs as well in the hive, for example. Reproduction in general would only actually be the responsibility of a few fertile individuals. So in the middle of this image here, you might see a queen bee. That queen is going to be able to reproduce, whereas the workers all around her are not able to reproduce. They are going to be carrying out all this labour in the hive, which again we'll look into is quite an extreme form of altruism. So in these honeybee societies, like I said, the queen bee can produce eggs, and there'll be a few male drones that can fertilise those eggs. So those eggs are then going to become female sterile workers. So none of these, none of these female workers will be able to have their own offspring, but what they will do is they will help raise and protect the queen's offspring. And again, it's a bit like kin selection. There's going to be shared genes being passed forward from these offspring, but the workers themselves will not be able to reproduce. So the main roles of sterile workers include raising these relatives, but they will also collect food and pollen, and also if the hive comes under attack, then they will defend the hive as well. So just to go into a little bit more detail, you can see some of the offspring being raised here, but these sterile workers will work together in order to raise these relatives, in order to raise the offspring of the queen. And this extreme altruism is, again, based on kin selection. It increases the survival of shared genes, even though it's not their own offspring, they still share those genes. In terms of collecting pollen, this is something you may have came across before, is this idea of a bee's waggle dance. So what a worker will do is it will go outside the hive, it will find a source of food or pollen. Now, rather than every single worker going out, expending energy, trying to find a source of food, if one of them finds some food or some pollen, it will come back to the hive and it will carry out a waggle dance. And a waggle dance is a bizarre form of moving and buzzing which gives directions to the rest of the hive to where that pollen can be found. So again, it's this idea of working in your social group, that rather than everyone going and wasting their energy trying to find pollen, you can go and communicate with the rest of your group where the pollen is, so that the other workers minimise their energy expenditure. And finally, if you are under attack, it's going to be those workers' jobs to defend the hive as well. They could do this for a few different ways. One of the obvious ones of honeybees is that they can just go and sting you, which is going to make sure that most individuals or most insects that are trying to attack will run away quite quickly, but they can also work together as a group. This is a strange form here in the bottom left of them attacking a hornet, where they can actually all vibrate to such a high level that they can actually generate such a huge amount of heat that they can actually kill off the attacker. So another quite big example of working together as a social group. But your main thing is you need to remember these sterile workers, they are not able to reproduce. The queen bee is, she's fertile, she can produce eggs. The sterile workers, though, will help raise those young, they will help find and collect pollen and food, and they will also defend the hive. And this idea, again, of this being an example of kin selection, where they are doing this in order to ensure the success of shared genes. Now finally, we're going to have a look at another group of animals. We're going to be looking at primates this time. Okay, so primates are a group of placental mammals that consist of humans, monkeys, apes and lemurs, with monkeys being most closely related to us and lemurs being most distantly related. So it's probably a group that you've came across before. What we just do, just to finish off this key area, is just have a look at some of the behaviours shown by primates in their social groups, and it's really just a bit of a recap over the social hierarchy that we've discussed. So, one of the main differences we find in primates compared to a lot of other animal groups is that primates tend to provide very long periods of parental care to their young. So rather than just having offspring, having multiple offspring, and almost leaving them to it, primates will spend a long time actually raising their offspring. So even if you think about humans, we were with our parents for a long time. With things such as the gorillas we have here, they will also be raising their offspring here rather than just leaving them to it. The reason for this is to give the offspring the opportunity to learn some complex social behaviours. So in terms of if you're going to live in a complex society, you need to learn some of the behaviours that go along with it. Some of these can be communication between different primates, which is going to be really important, again, if you do live and work in a social group, particularly if there's social defence, if there's cooperative hunting. But also this idea of play as well allows offspring to basically watch the adult members of the group and practice and all this sort of things. But really the idea behind this extended level of parental care is to allow to drill in this idea of how this social hierarchy works. You can see on the left there was a very angry gorilla here, and on the right there's quite a submissive gorilla as well. So what happens here, just like in most social hierarchies, is that your dominant individuals carry out these ritualistic threat displays. So it can be the beating chest, standing up very tall, baring teeth, screaming. And a subordinate who wants to reduce conflict will carry out submissive appeasement behaviour. Okay, again, by not challenging them, by maybe keeping their body language subdued, keeping their head low, ensuring that they are not challenging the dominant member, and instead they're agreeing that they are the dominant. So you can see some examples here of these monkeys on the left that are having a bit of a scrap, and again they're both going through this threat display. They're asserting their dominance, but then what will happen, like you can see on the right, is the loser is going to adopt that appeasement behaviour, and that's going to reduce the conflict, hopefully stop it, and also assert who is ahead of who in terms of the social hierarchy. In terms of some of these submissive behaviours though, in terms of primates, we can see a range of appeasement behaviour. Some of them will be grooming, so we talked about grooming in terms of altruism, but it can be also be a sign of showing friendship between individuals. It can be a way of reducing tension if there's conflict, so that could be one thing that's seen as submissive behaviour. Facial expressions are quite a big thing in primates. There's certain forms of exposing teeth and smacking their lips, which is showing appeasement, it's showing submission, and there can often be some bowing as well, lowering your head, showing submissive behaviour. And in some primate societies as well, we will see this idea of sexual presentation, where sometimes the female chimps, for example, can present themselves to dominant males in order to try and reduce conflict if the reason why a male is showing dominance over an area is for reproduction. And finally, we touched on this before, but just to show that this happens in primates as well, is that some primates will form alliances between individuals. And again, the idea of forming an alliance is always to increase social status. It's to work your way up this social hierarchy. And as we can see here, we've got some monkeys with plans here that are working together, forming an alliance, and that'll be able to increase their social status. And that's it for key area 6. Apologies for my voice throughout that. But your main thing for social behaviour is you need to know the reasons for living in social groups and the different behaviours such as social hierarchy, cooperative hunting and social defence. We then talked about altruism and the different types of altruism. So your reciprocal altruism and your idea of kin selection as well. But then applying that to the idea of social insects. So remember, social insects such as bees and ants and wasps and termites, they have some very complex societies where you have your queen bees that are fertile and you have your workers which are sterile, but they will then go and put a lot of work, put a lot of labour into actually running the hive, looking after the offspring, raising the offspring, bringing food and defending the hive. Again, this idea of kin selection, where they're going to go and benefit from the shared genes being passed on. And finally, we just took a little look at primates and how they work. And the main thing really there being their long periods of parental care. So, hope you're all doing well with Unit 3, folks. Thanks so much for all your comments. Really appreciated seeing them. Glad people find these videos useful. We're getting towards the end of Unit 3 and the course in general now, so we'll get the rest of the videos up really soon for you folks. Okay, so thanks so much again for listening, and I'll speak to you again soon. Bye for now.